All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm a huge fan of getting started on time. I'm Dr. Peggy Kuiper. Most people just know me as Peggy, the Director of Sport and Recreation Business here at University of Alaska Fairbanks, and appreciate everybody willing to join us tonight for this great speaker series, one that's dear to my heart, having grown up in Northern Michigan as having a dad that owned a bow shop. Hunting has been a huge part of my life. And so tonight we are joined by three people that have made careers in the hunting and conservation industries. And so without further ado, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with McKenzie and then Kurt and then Steve. So. McKenzie, you're on mute too, sorry.
Good way to start things off there. Well, thanks so much for having me on here. My name is McKenzie Mitchell. I am adjunct faculty at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I teach economics and recreation management courses. I also work part-time as a flight instructor. I serve the Alaska State Board of Fisheries, and the dearest to my heart is probably owning and operating a big game guide service here in the interior. Thanks.
My name's Kurt Roscoe, and I am designer with Stone Glacier backpacks, and we're based out of Bozeman, Montana. Well, we started with backpacks, and now we do all different types of hunting apparel and sleeping bags and tents and backpacks as well. And so our company has started it in 2012. And as far as, did you want background on academics, Peggy? Or
yeah, we will. That would be great too. So, and we might joke with McKenzie for that too. So.
Okay. Yeah, I got my degree from Montana State University, and it was in education. So majored in technology education, minored in biology, and then that's what brought me to Alaska, was teaching.
Awesome. Thanks, Kurt.
Yep.
Hey everybody, good to see you. Thanks for your interest in this topic. So my name is Steve Adair. I'm the chief scientist for Ducks Unlimited. I grew up on the Texas Gulf Coast. That's where I really developed my passion for the outdoors. I did my undergrad at UT Austin. I was actually a pre-med major and got accepted to med school, and I didn't enroll. My heart really wasn't in it. It's one of the things where that's what everybody was telling me I should do, but I didn't really have a passion for it. And I really love wildlife biology and conservation. So I figured I could see if I could make a living at that. And I went to Texas A&M and had a master's in wildlife biology. And then I went to Utah State and got a PhD in ecology, and started working for some private landowners in South Carolina for a few years, and then came to Ducks Unlimited. I've been there for 25 years now. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And McKenzie, I don't think you told us about your academic background, but if you could, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in California, born and raised, and then moved to Alaska in 2010 to pursue hunting and fishing, and decided to go to college. So I ended up going to UAF. I got my undergraduate degree at UAF in economics, and then I continued on and got my graduate degree in resource and applied economics from UAF, and I am now teaching here.
Awesome. Well, again, I think just everybody on the call or on the Zoom call today, we're super fortunate to have the three of these folks on the call, and they're all downplaying their experience. But we'll get into that a little bit more. So starting out, and we'll start out going, maybe Kurt, you can jump into this. Do you personally hunt? And if so, how did you get into it? And then Steve and McKenzie, I'll have you follow from there.
Yes, I do hunt. It's probably my number one passion that I like to do outside of family and home life. I got into it, I grew up around it. My father hunted, my grandfather hunted, and I grew up outside of Missoula, Montana. And so we duck hunted, we deer hunted, we tried to elk hunt. We weren't terribly successful, but we always had venison in the freezer. And so that's kind of where I got my start.
Yeah, so I do hunt. I started hunting small game with my father. I was probably 14, something like that. And, we did rabbits and squirrels and dove and quail. And then I had some high school buddies introduce me to waterfowl hunting. I really caught a passion for that. And then some of my college buddies introduced me to big game hunting. And I really enjoy it all. I love all the different strategies. I love the physical challenge of hunting. And my family really places a lot of value on eating wild meat. So even some of them that don't hunt, they raid my freezer when they're home. So we really enjoy the whole aspect of it.
I did not grow up hunting at all, not even in the slightest, really. In the area that I grew up in, there was not a lot of that going on. However, I did have one friend in high school whose parents would take her bird hunting. And I got to go along a couple of times and immediately kind of developed a passion despite the limited experience or exposure to hunting. Enough so to where when I was 20 years old, I sold my car and bought a plane ticket to Alaska. And I called every hunting and fishing outfitter I could. And I told them I'd work for free to get experience in the hunting and fishing world. And I'm still doing it.
And we'll get more tied into that in a bit too, McKenzie. And I have to kind of chuckle of like my first hunting was hunting grasshoppers with BB guns and also like whatever me and my brother could shoot with bows. So it was not glorious, but it was fun. So and it still is fun. So can you tell me about your current organization and how it's maybe tied to hunting? And we'll switch the roll up here and go Steve, McKenzie, and Kurt this go around. So.
Yeah, you bet. So Ducks Unlimited this year is celebrating its 85th anniversary. And so we were formed by a small group of duck hunters back during the Dust Bowl. So these gentlemen were really concerned about declining waterfowl populations. All the wetlands were dried up and things were pretty dire. And they said, we got to do something about that. And so they formed Ducks Unlimited and started doing habitat projects primarily in Canada then, and then later in Mexico and in the US. So that organization's grown. We have about 1,000 staff now, about 1 million supporters across North America. I think our supporters continue to be more diverse. So we do have people that don't hunt, that just care about environmental outcomes, but the vast majority of our members and supporters are hunters still. And I guess the way we're tied to business, we have banquets across the country, and those are organized by volunteers. They get small businesses that are interested in community involvement to support those banquets. We have a lot of what they call endemic partners. So you can imagine gun manufacturers and ammo manufacturers and camo and dog food and trucks and all the things you think about when you think about a hunting adventure. But we do have a growing number of corporate partners. And so I think you guys probably have all seen the growing interest in sustainability and making pledges to be carbon neutral and water positive and things like that. And a lot of our conservation projects deliver on those sustainability initiatives. So we're working with lots of companies across the country now to help them meet some of their sustainability goals.
So as I mentioned before, I'm with Stone Glacier, and I started Stone Glacier in 2012. And I would say 95% of our customer base are hunters, and primarily big game hunters. From the perspective of the gear, that we design it, we manufacture it, and then we sell it. A majority of it we sell direct to consumer. We do have some outlets, wholesale accounts that we do work through. Barney's in Anchorage is our one that's in Alaska that carries all of our gear. And from the design perspective, a majority of our customer base are alpine style, big game hunters. A lot of our gear is designed for sheep, goat. A lot of our customers are from Alaska, BC, Yukon, Northwest areas. But we do see it branch out through a lot of the US just because there aren't those opportunities in a majority of the other states like there are in Montana where I live, or Alaska where a majority of you guys live. So yeah, our customers are, everything we do is directly to the hunter.
Oh, McKenzie, the floor is yours. Thanks, Kurt and Steve.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, I transitioned from being an assistant guide to being a registered guide outfitter here in Alaska, which allowed me to go ahead and start my company, Bog Outfitters. I have about 3 guides working for me, including myself. I'm registered in 6 different game management units spanning from Northern Alaska, Central, Western, and then also the island of Kodiak. I primarily take sheep and moose hunters, but however, I can also take bear and caribou. I just don't typically promote those hunts as much as I do my sheep and moose hunts. I take a handful of clients a year. That's the operational volume that's comfortable for me right now, operating on state lands and with some BLM areas. So, yeah.
McKenzie, can you maybe elaborate too on some of the permitting and process of starting your own business? Like, was it easy, or could you talk a little bit more about that? And then Kurt, I'm going to ask the same of you. Can you talk about how easy was it for you to get started?
I would say it was kind of trial by fire. It definitely was not easy by any standard. A lot of kind of learning as you go, banging your head against the wall. Alaska has a lot of regulations when it comes to the hunting industry and land management, various landowners. The permitting process for all of those is very different and elaborate in some situations. Federal lands are kind of on a guide concession program. State lands are more available, but you have to get a permit still to be able to operate. BLM is similar, and there's an application process. It's pretty thorough. So there's a lot of navigating paperwork, licensing, permits. Each one of those game management unit areas was associated with a hefty fee to take the test, and a pretty comprehensive test to be able to register, plus having the time and experience in those areas. So there is a lot to it. And that's in addition to your basic starting a business efforts like licensing, coming up with payroll, getting a good accountant, other professional services like having a lawyer in your back pocket, all of which have become important as well. So.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Kurt, how about you?
Well, it was a little unconventional how Stone Glacier started. I had come up with a design over the course of, pretty close to 2 years of a backpack that I wanted to produce, or I wanted to see go to market. And I approached several different companies to see if they were interested, and they were all headed down their own path. They had their product line set, so they weren't interested in using the design. And so it came to the point that if I wanted to see it go to market, I was going to have to do it myself. And then I just started small, set the amount that I was going to invest in the company, set a plan based off of that amount, and was going to be happy with whatever growth, or if it cratered, then it wasn't a good idea. So I was going to kind of let the market decide how that went. And so after the first production run, they sold quickly. I rolled the money and soon found out that I needed the long range plan and to bring other people in to get help and to actually set a long range business plan.
And are you guys doing manufacturing and all of that? Is that all US based, or are you outsourcing outside of the US?
Yeah, we do a little bit of both. So we started with backpacks. So all of our backpacks and accessories, our vinyl harnesses, our gaiters, those are all made in the US. And then once we jumped into apparel and tents, the manufacturing in the US for technical apparel is very, very slim. It's really hard to get in. And then you're competing with companies like Arc'teryx or Patagonia that have their leaf programs that are selling to the military. So that is made overseas. And then, but yeah, everything that we can that fits into our manufacturing facilities here, we have made here.
Awesome. And I bring that up to the students because they're and McKenzie as well. And Steve, I'm sure you deal with your fair share of permitting and like the logistical side of business on the operations side. There's a lot that goes into it. It's a lot more than what you see of like just taking a client out or selling a backpack or for Steve doing any kind of project. There's so much that goes into it from a business perspective. And so that's why I brought that up. And so thank you to all three of you for answering that. And a question that I think a lot of people want to know, what do you like most about what you do? And then I'll follow that up with what challenges, what are some of the challenges that you see, and maybe start with McKenzie this go around.
I like everything about what I do. It's hard at times, for sure. There's days where you feel like you put in hundreds of hours of effort and moved an inch in progress, but that's kind of part of it. I wanted to do this since the day I moved to Alaska to pursue this dream. So even through the challenges, I'm kind of fully enjoying the process. It's definitely a roller coaster. The hardest thing about what I do, I mean, I'm in the very beginning stages of having started my company. So, you know, it's not where I want it to be yet, and there's challenges to try and get it there. But that's kind of part of the process, and I guess as to be expected. I mean, obviously an unsuccessful hunter is a hard part of the day, but at the same time, you know, we go out there and we give it our all, and in that situation, most every client still walks away feeling like they put it all on the table and did their best, and hunting's hunting. So, but yeah, I love it all, I guess.
Awesome, thanks. Steve, what about you?
Yeah, so I would describe Ducks Unlimited as we're a very nimble organization, and there's lots of passionate people. So I really love working in that culture of innovation and people wanting to get things done. So, you know, personally, I also just really love wild places. So I get a lot of satisfaction at the end of the day, you know, knowing that you did something to try to keep those places around for, you know, yourself and your family and also future generations. So I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. Challenging things, you know, in any organization, especially as you get larger, you get silos among departments, and those create challenges. And you know, you really have to be deliberate about communicating and in teamwork in order to make sure you're all pulling the same direction and not, you know, countering what everybody else is trying to do. So sometimes that gets frustrating to have to, you know, be really deliberate about that. The other thing about DU is we're a nonprofit, so you know, we don't get tax money. We don't have a very big endowment every year. We got to raise the funds to get our work done. So that creates some stress, knowing that you have to kind of start over to some degree every year. But it also, you know, creates opportunity that you can sort of pave your own way. So if you like that type of environment, it works really well. But it is definitely a challenge.
Steve, on that note too, how did you, kind of jumping back here, so you're a trained biologist clearly, how did you develop those like managerial and like organizational behavior skills and development skills? Was that like new ground to you, or did you build as you went up the chain, or could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, you kind of get, you know, thrown into the fire when you start. You're well trained in science and biology, and then all of a sudden you got to deal with budgets and people and communications and policy and all these other things. And DU has a really good training program, so they do a lot of, you know, training of those types of skills. And then I've had opportunities over the years to do some more advanced training. So you know, you definitely run into situations that you don't feel like you're prepared for, and you learn and you make mistakes, and you know, everybody does, but you keep going. But yeah, people are complicated, so that's a hard part of dealing with things.
Awesome, thanks. Kurt, how about you?
I would say my favorite part of my job is really what drew me into it from the start, and that's the design creative portion of it, where you either have an idea for a product or you have a problem that you're trying to solve with a certain product, and then just being able to work through that process of building it, test it, tear it apart, change it, go test it again. I really enjoy that portion of it. I think, well, without a doubt, the most challenging for me is the communication. So the communication that we have with our factories and all the moving parts that go into just one product. Between, you have to have all the specs and the measurements and the right fabrics and the placement, the seams, and all of those little details are kind of the things that keep me up at night, because you place an order for 1,000 of them. If you're an inch off on something and your bag doesn't fit your frame, there isn't much you can do. And so those are the challenges, to make sure that is all buttoned up tight every time that you go to production.
Do you have any examples of nightmare? I feel like you're speaking from experience. Has there been a specific example that rings in your mind?
There have been several small things. When you're doing just thousands and thousands of pieces, at some point, the mathematics is going to catch up with you, the probability of something. Fortunately, up to this point, we've had little things where there's a buckle in the wrong spot, and those types of things can be fixed. I think it's more along the lines of fabric defects, or those are the challenges that you want to get around larger scale.
That makes sense. And McKenzie, I'll jump back to you for a second too. Thinking about bringing somebody likely from the lower 48 up into Dall sheep country, like, how do you mitigate that risk? Or have you had any, how do you prepare for that? Or do you have any examples of things like where it was a little bit of a sketchy situation? Or how do you manage people out in the field that you don't know, that are essentially strangers?
Right. Now that I'm the outfitter, I'm directly booking the clients. So I have the opportunity to kind of vet them and talk about things and make sure that they have the right gear. I provide everybody with a gear list, but I also personally deal with every client that I've booked for my company. However, working as an assistant guide for about 10 years was a totally different situation, where I am just handed a client that was booked by whatever outfitter I was working for. And I've had times where I've had clients show up for a sheep hunt with jeans and a JanSport backpack, and I'm going, this is going to be rough. But having the right gear and equipment, and then communication to follow up on what the other speakers have said too, is huge. Making sure that the client understands the hunt that they're getting ready to come on, making sure that they understand what type of gear and equipment. A lot of times I'll meet with my clients before they get chartered out into the field, just to make sure that they are bringing the correct gear and not too much gear. So it's just kind of just being really, really thorough in that process of both booking and then getting them into the field.
Awesome. Great. I guess great experience from all three of you. So if a student, so primarily the students on the call and in our classes are business students. So if a student has an interest in kind of going your path, and I know two of you are entrepreneurs, what kind of jobs would exist in your sub area of the field if they wanted to get their foot in the door and didn't know what to do? And that doesn't necessarily mean starting their own business, but maybe they want to work for a company like Stone Glacier, or work for a big game guide, or in Steve's case, a conservation organization. How do they get started? What kind of jobs exist out there? And I'll start with Steve.
Yeah, so I would say about a third of our staff are kind of the obvious ones. You think about biologists and agronomists and engineers that design and deliver conservation projects. Another third of our staff are primarily fundraisers that put on banquets, work with corporations, foundations to raise funds. Another third are a whole mix of folks like communications and marketing, public policy. You have quite a few accountants and contract compliance officers. You get a lot of state and federal funding, and every one of those has rules and regulations you have to to deal with. We have IT staff, GIS analysts, HR professionals, a few lawyers. Mostly they deal with contract law, but real estate specialists, even kind of meeting planners. So a whole variety of people working for Ducks Unlimited. And I think the common thread with them is that they have a passion for conservation. They want a job that they feel like they're making a difference in the world, and that's what brings them to the organization and kind of keeps them there. So
I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball at you. Does D internships?
We do. Yeah, we have internships in most of those areas, and we also we have a lot of waterfowl research projects, wetland research projects in the summer. So we hire a lot of college students, technician jobs for 3 or 4 months in the summer to go out and collect data, and that's a really good way to get experience and meet people. So yeah, those are good ways to get your foot in the door, so to speak.
For sure. Kurt, I'll jump to you and kind of throw you the same question that I gave to Steve of what if a student wants to work for an organization like Stone Glacier or Stone Glacier, but also what if they want to start their own business? What advice would you give them?
Well, I'll start with at least the positions within the company. Very similar to a lot of other businesses out there where you're going to have everything from the financials, accounting type positions. We have sales positions. Also marketing is a big one in our industry. We have a marketing director, and then we also have one individual who does nothing but our videos. And so there's lots of opportunity in creating content in that way. And then we also have quite a few positions where it's product fulfillment. So we take all of the orders in, we ship, we package, we do all of that. We assemble a lot of our products there. So there's a lot of opportunity. And what we find is as we start to grow, we're moving people up from the lower, but we're also looking for outside talent. So I think focusing on whatever your specific niche is or that you like to do and trying to weave that into the business that you're trying to get into. In regards to starting your own business, I think the biggest thing is having a detailed plan. And that was something I didn't have in the very beginning because I just wanted to do it. I wasn't looking to transition from my career. I was looking to bring a product to market. And then once it was there, that's when I had to come back and create a detailed plan of what is this going to look like? What are my budgets going to be? And figuring out your financials and being very honest with yourself and not saying, if I only do this, I can hit a home run. It's how do I systematically move through and improve every month to get to where I want to be? And in order to do that, I found that developing specific systems for everything that you need to do, whether it's your financial planning or it's your production or anything that you can get into a system, do it. Because especially in the beginning, you're going to be doing everything from sweeping the floors to doing your accounting, to doing your design work, to doing all of it. So really you're at a point where you don't have enough hours in the day. So being as efficient as you can, and for me, that came from organization and systems. You just couldn't have enough of either one of them.
I'll give you guys a little bit of a plug here on the marketing side. I'm always impressed of the content that you create, and like I just received, and for students out there, if you're not familiar with Stone Glacier, check out their website and their social media. It's done really well. Their branding is done really well. And the catalog in particular that just came out last week, I was like, this is really done really well and it's really good. So for students interested in marketing, I know there's a handful on the call, check them out for sure. And McKenzie, I'll jump over to you. What about starting your own business, or what if a student wants to become like you? What if they want to become a guide? How do they get their foot in the door? And I know you can speak from experience of, yeah, I'll let you.
Thanks, Peggy. So typically in the hunting outfitting world, to get your foot in the door, you go and work as a packer for a couple of years for a registered guide. And then by gaining time and experience in the field in a guide camp, they can endorse you for a registered or for an assistant guide license, and then you can start working as an assistant guide. I wasn't familiar with the industry when I first moved up here, so I literally just called hunting and fishing lodges and I said I'll work for free to get experience and time in the field, and I wound up on Kodiak Island, working for a hunting and fishing lodge out there, and I just did everything until I had acquired enough sea time to get my captain's license, became a sport fishing guide, and then got my assistant guide license from them. So kind of like packing, but not in the most traditional sense as what you would typically do as a packer, where you're just literally flown out into the field and responsible for moving meat and helping with camps. But that's the most common way, is to start out as a packer. So calling different guides and outfitters, and basically seeing if they need help. There's Alaska Professional Hunters Association, which has a list of outfitters who are in need of help. And so that's a good place to start and at least get contacts for certain outfitters that might be looking for somebody. Let's see. In terms of like services I hire out for, I have a payroll lady that works for me. I hire an accountant. I have a lawyer connection. I have a web designer, and then I hire Part 135 air taxis to do all my flying. So I don't do any of that on my own during the season. So that's the most common approach to it. I guess that will answer all your questions, Peggy.
I think so, yeah. And what if, so I think 40% of our students or so are from out of Alaska. Are big game regulations same state to state? And do they, and you might not know this one, I think you know that one, but are they the same in Canada or Africa? Like, can you talk about that process at all?
Yeah, so my Alaska guide license is only good in Alaska. And I had to have so many days in the field, and then I had to hold an assistant guide license for so many years and acquire so much time and experience in different game management unit areas to then be eligible for my registered guide license. I'm not super familiar with the licensing process in other states. However, I have been told that having an Alaska guide experience would lend itself to getting a license or a job within the field of other states, just because Alaska is a real remote rural area. I know there's different point systems and stuff like that, but a lot of draws that happen in the lower 48 and different hunting areas. And we have draws here as well, but I really can't speak to outside of Alaska. It's outside of my expertise.
But the general premise, I think you did a great job at answering that. And for students is that it's going to vary state to state. It's going to vary country to country. Just because you're registered in Alaska doesn't mean you can just go somewhere else and guide. And that's something really important to understand. The other point that you hit on that I think is important for students on the call that have an interest in working in the sports industry, as well as McKenzie said, I just volunteered to get my foot in the door. And that's exactly a parallel there in the sports industry as well. And I say that to work up the ranks in basketball. So my background was basketball. I worked any camp that I could to, just to get my foot in the door, and worked often for free. And that was what led me into the NBA's minor league system. And at age 25 in the front office, and it was the willingness to do whatever it took. And I think that's the message that Kurt was kind of getting at too, of like, if you have a passion or a vision for design, you do whatever you can to get there. And I think that's a really important message for students. So I appreciate both of you kind of alluding to that. Let's switch gears here a little bit, or I guess stick down the student advice advice path. What advice would you give to students who might want to do what you do? Whoops. And I guess I'll come off a mute here. Well, I'll start with McKenzie this time. What advice would you give to students?
If you're wanting to get into the hunting world and you, just start signing up, calling outfitters and getting packer roles, camp cook roles, really whatever foot in the door you can, try and go with a reputable outfitter. They'll probably have it pretty dialed in, been operating for a while. yeah, you just kind of gotta start wherever you're at. You know, if you have a lot of hunting experience, you still are gonna have to go through the route to get the time in a guide camp to be able to get signed off on an assistant guide license. So, and then just in terms of if you want to be an entrepreneur, put your head down and march. And don't give up, because you're gonna bang your head against a lot of walls.
What about getting your foot in the door? I know this isn't on being a pilot, but say somebody wants to be a bush pilot like you.
I wouldn't necessarily call myself a bush pilot yet. I recently got my flight instructor and instrument flight instructor ratings. So I'm still in the building hour process, and building off airport experience to hopefully be able to be at a point to transport my clients field based at some point. Same exact thing of how I got my guide's license. I literally cleaned airplanes and did snow removal in exchange for flight hours at a local flight school, until I got my private pilot's license. And then I applied for flight scholarships and continued to exchange labor for flight hours, all the way through the instrument and then commercial and CFI and CFII rating. So if you love something and want it, you'll get it done no matter what it takes. And I've seen that from other driven, passionate people. And I try and support everybody I can when they have a dream, because it's worth it when you kind of can make it all come together.
Awesome. Steve, I'll jump over to you. What advice would you give to students?
Yeah, and first of all, I just echo what Kurt and McKenzie both said. You know, if you have a passion for something, go for it. I mean, we spend a lot of our lives working, and you know, it's all about doing something that you love and enjoy. That's the key to it. So put yourself into it. Like Peggy, you touched on, you know, with Ducks Unlimited or any conservation organization, just getting your foot in the door with an internship, summer tech. You know, we've had people do like you talked about, and McKenzie talked about, and said, hey, I just want to job shadow for a couple of weeks and get to know each other. And, you know, they'll do that for free. And a lot of times, you know, they go on ahead and get a job, you know, after you develop that relationship. So, you know, be creative, you know, be forceful in some ways, let people know that you really do want to do those things. DU, Rocky Mountain Elk, Pheasants Forever, Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife, we all have websites with job boards on them. So, you know, check those. You can look and see what's available. And, you know, a lot of them are pretty high demand, pretty competitive. So you see something you're interested in, jump on it and go for it. But I think a lot of it is just, you know, getting to know people and making those connections, and that can really open doors for you.
Awesome. Kurt, what about you?
Well, I guess there's kind of two different paths, as we had talked about. If you're looking to get in the industry and maybe not start your own business, there's obviously going to be a bit more opportunity right off the get-go, just because it's much less of a process. But that being said, I would focus on how does your skill set fit into the business that you're going to apply for. If you want to get into the hunting industry, say that you wanted to apply at Stone Glacier, one of the first things that we would look at is how does this skill set help the company accomplish what it needs to accomplish. So if you're in marketing or any of those things, being able to bring and communicate with the company exactly what you could bring to them. So for example, we get quite a few people who write an email and say, here's my resume. If there's ever an opening, please let me know. And they might be qualified for some of the positions, but it might be super general. So being specific and being able to give the company a path. And the second thing is, and I think somebody mentioned it before, is if this is really your dream, being tenacious about it, because there's a difference between a person who walks into our shop and comes up and shakes your hand and say, I'm really interested in getting into this industry. I love what you guys are doing. I understand what you're doing. I understand your company. I understand your company voice, and I want to be involved in this. That's a different thing than sending out a designer resume to a half dozen different companies and see what happens. those are the type of people that we want to bring into our organization, the people who already know who we are and what we do, because everybody that's there is very passionate about it. And so that passion comes through when we're hiring, and we would be willing to train somebody who might have a lower experience or less experience, and if they have the right personality and passion to go along with it. So it's one of those things. It's just hard to communicate via electronics. So if at all possible, you can go look somebody in the eye. I think it's going to go a lot farther.
I think that's great advice, especially on the soft skills side of things. We often talk about just the hard skills, like I'm a good accountant or I'm a good marketer, but those people skills and the passion are irreplaceable no matter what area of the industry you're in. And I appreciate Bruce's message here. And I agree, if you're doing business in Alaska, is understanding Alaska Native studies and particularly Alaska Native, his message there and how they depend on natural resources. And I encourage everybody on this call to check out our Alaska Native Studies program on campus, because that is a huge part of doing business, especially when we're talking about natural resources and hunting in Alaska. So thank you, Bruce, for that. I agree. The follow-up, one of the questions I have for Steve that I wanted to follow up a little bit on. So in the sports world, when we're dealing with like corporate partners, like if I'm dealing with Chase as a sponsor, there's a sports marketing arm within Chase Bank. Is that the same on the conservation side of things? So when you're talking about dealing with corporations, is there somebody that you're dealing with specifically with sustainability or something along those lines? Or can you explain on the corporation side who you might be dealing with?
Yeah, that's a good question, Peggy. So the corporations, it tends to be kind of two lines we work with. One is their philanthropic side. So a lot of them have charitable giving, and they'll have officers that work on that side of the business. So that's one avenue. A lot of our fundraising staff work with that. The other is more their business side, where they're actually purchasing a tangible thing like a carbon offset or a water replenishment credit, and those tend to be more sustainability officers and more kind of the mainstream business side. So we work on both sides. We really do it as a team effort of our science group, our project group, and then our fundraising group go together, and so that we can cover those different interests. But it is pretty fast. Some corporations are pretty challenging to figure out who the decision makers are and how it all comes together. But I would say those are the two general avenues that we work with corporations on.
I feel like every business is challenging. I'm still trying to figure out UAF, and I've been there for 5 years, so I don't think that's unique to
Yeah.
So to jump again here to topics, what does your day-to-day look like? And for McKenzie, this might be season to season, or Kurt or Steve as well. And I'll start with Kurt on this one. I know you probably wear a lot of hats, but what is your typical day like, or is there no such thing as a typical day for you?
Yeah, so a typical day for me, it kind of, once again, it varies throughout the season, but like everybody, you probably start off with your email, because a lot of things can change direction right there. And so it's communication with factories, making sure all of that's set. We don't have any questions. We don't have anything that we need to provide them. And then from there, I just work through the individual products that we have. So we have a product design season, depending on which product it is, if it's in the US or if it's made overseas. So I'll go through and I'll do our apparel all in one group, and then I'll move to our backpacks. So it really just kind of depends on what we have there. And then there's also field days that are mixed in there. So another portion of mine, which I feel very lucky to have, a portion of my job is to actually go out and use the gear and make sure that it's going to perform and it does what we need to do. So yeah, that's pretty much how my day goes.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the field testing because I use quite a few of your products out in the field and they have yet to fail me and have saved me in many times, especially the tent. So it's like my go-to tent, not like it is my go-to tent. It's like my most trusted thing in my pack in Alaska. So McKenzie, how about you? What's your typical day-to-day or season to season look like? I know you do a lot.
Well, right now is the off season for me in terms of hunting. However, typically in the hunting industry, a lot of outfitters would be attending the different sport shows that happen around the country this time of year. So Safari Club International, Wild Sheep Show. I have attended those shows in the past while working for other outfitters. I am not at a place with my business to where I need to attend those right now. I'm booking the number of clients that works for me right now without attending shows. And also I'm currently teaching, so it's hard for me to get away and outside of Fairbanks right now. So I am teaching right now. I got some fishery stuff going on with the Board of Fish in the winter months. And then before the season starts though, for several months, I'm putting my camps together, making sure my gear is good, talking with my transporters, making sure that they're all lined out and have the dates for taking my clients and my guides into the field and getting them out. Ordering new equipment, which during COVID was obviously, I'm sure Kurt could talk to that. Production issues was difficult. So that definitely was something that we ran into last year, and getting the gear that I was needing for my camps. And then during the season, I am still guiding. So I personally am always taking a client, and I have all my guides in the field as well with different clients, and I'm communicating with them via InReach throughout the season. But we're just hunting and we're doing what we love to do. So. And then, postseason, I guess, dealing with all the paperwork, going through and making sure I pay for my client use day fees, depending on the land that I was using, making sure that my clients were able to take home whatever meat they wanted to take home, get their trophies sealed if needed at Fish and Game, package, help getting them back home with the meat and trophy that they were able to harvest. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Steve, how about you? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, unfortunately, Kirk said lots of email. It's hard to keep up with all of that all the time, but definitely a big part of the daily job. Do a lot of Zoom and Teams. So we have lots of teams with NBU, science team, policy teams, communication teams. Spend a lot of time on that. We also have lots of these types of meetings with external partners. So partners with agencies or other conservation organizations, do a lot of reading and writing. So I do the science editing for DE. So I have to read all of our communication products, make sure that they're scientifically accurate. And so I do a lot of that. Help with developing public policy. So looking at, types of proposals that might further conservation and having input on that. Have a couple trips a month, so travel around the US we have different offices around the country and different partners and projects going on. So I get to go spend time with those folks. One of the really interesting things is there's a lot of geographic diversity in my job. So within a week, I may be working, talking about mangroves down in Mexico, and then a couple of days later, the boreal forest in Canada, and kind of everything in between. So that's one of the really fun aspects, is that you get to cover a lot of North America and get to see and experience those places. So,
Steve, is DU just North American, or do you have outreach outside of the US or outside of North America as well? Or
it is mostly Canada, US, and Mexico. We do some Latin American training. So we have students that come from all over Latin America a couple times a year to a training center we have in Mexico. And there used to be a DU Australia and a DU New Zealand, and we're not as involved with them as we used to be. But yeah, that's kind of the extent of our reach.
awesome. We have about 10 minutes left. And so if students or guests, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll keep keep going here on questions. And I'll have to poke fun at the comment that you made, Steve, about science. There's a scientist on the call who I co-teach with, Mark Lindbergh. He's an Arctic biologist, and I hope you check all his science. I've heard he's questionable at times. So I'm just joking for anybody out there that thinks I'm serious. I'm not. He's a full professor on campus. So the other, I guess the next question I have is for all of you, and what benefits do hunting or conservation organizations, both depending on, I think each of you bring a different perspective, but how does your organization impact the local community in which you operate? And I'll start, Kurt, I'll start with you.
Okay. Yes. So since we started, we've always had a very strong partnership with Wild Sheep Foundation, and because that's kind of who we were designing gear for, especially in the beginning, and it's still that way. So both nationally and local chapters, pretty much all of them around the Northwest, Alaska, Canada, we're involved with their fundraising there. We're also a part of 2% for Conservation, where 1% of our revenue, and then we calculate up our man hours, and 1% of our man hours also go to conservation. So we try to stay attached with those different types of things, and then we also try to pick up a project or two throughout the year. Whether it be last summer, we did one with the Montana Fish and Game to help with the antelope fence, or the antelope moving through prairie areas and fences. And then we've done some things with mule deer with other states. So we try to stay connected in those realms.
That's great. For students out there in the business world, we call that corporate social responsibility. And so Stone Glacier is super active with conservation organizations. And so I appreciate that. McKenzie, how about you? How does big game guiding or hunting impact local communities?
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. Well, it really depends on where you're operating at. As I mentioned before, there's various different land managers in Alaska, and some is federal land, state land. You have a lot of native lands. And so kind of navigating and depending on where exactly you're running an operation and how near you are to some of those communities. So in some of the areas that I work in, building relationship with some of the villages and smaller communities that are really remote and in the middle of nowhere, building rapport with those communities has been really, really important with the work that I do and in some of the areas that I hunt in. So kind of connecting with the people that live in these smaller communities, and it's not super uncommon for, meat that clients don't want to take back to get donated to communities, or to, make sure that we're buying things from those communities to bring in some economic benefit. So it really kind of just depends. Some communities would rather not have, an outfitting service in certain areas and respecting that. And then other ones like building those relationships where it can be kind of mutually beneficial. So, Alaska is pretty unique in that sense, is that we have a lot of, smaller communities that are really dependent on the resources. And so just kind of feeling it out and kind of working with people as best as you can, and respecting the people that currently live in the areas that you're going to try and operate in.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point. And Steve, how about you?
Yeah, so what we really focus on is protecting and restoring habitat. So places where wildlife can flourish, and I'd like to think of places for folks like McKenzie to bring clients and use the gear that Kirk's producing, and so we all kind of work together on that. And I think if you look at some of the economic studies that have been done, having quality outdoor experiences really helps to diversify local economies. I've heard lots of stories over the years about the service industry, hotels and restaurants, and how important hunters are to maintaining, their viability and diversifying their resources. I think hunting is really another valuable part of a robust and sustainable economy for local communities.
There are a couple good studies out there in Alaska, one done by UAA's Center for Economic Development. I might be getting the name wrong there. And then also I think by the Professional Big Game Hunters, and it talks a lot about economic impacts of hunting. The same goes for other, just outside of Alaska as well, because I know there's a number of people on the call that are outside of Alaska, but Africa is well known for, they rely on big game hunting as a huge driver in certain areas of the country to for their economy to boom. And so it's just a really important element, and I won't get into the weeds on that, but we had a good question here from Aaron, and a comment from Mark that Stone Glacier packs work great for old men like him. So that's good. You've got a fan on the call, Kurt. Let's see. Aaron has a great question here. Is this industry a particularly rewarding field to work in? I would imagine you would meet a lot of interesting people by working in this field. And so I'll start with McKenzie. Is it rewarding what you do? And you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my motto is pretty much, I do what I love with you. That's kind of my selling point for my company is that I want to be doing this anyway. And it's really enjoyable for me to take and share those experiences with other people. I'm feel very fortunate to be where I'm at with my company now, to be providing other young people job opportunities to become packers or to get involved in the industry, as well as being able to offer youth hunts and donate hunts to try and expose people who maybe wouldn't be able to participate in the big game industry. So I absolutely love every step of it. So yeah.
Steve, I'll jump over to you. Same question to you from Aaron.
Yeah, I think the people involved in this industry are great. You know, the professional staff that you work with, and then, you know, we have almost 50,000 volunteers that put their time and energy into DU to put on events and help raise funds and promote the message. I'm always just blown away by how into it they are, how much energy and time they put into it. So that is a really neat part of the profession that you get to experience.
And then Kurt, how about you?
I would agree with all those comments. At least from our client base, everybody that you talk to is very passionate about the same things that you are. So you have this instant connection with people, and they're also coming to you looking for something that is going to help them do what they love to enjoy, or what they really enjoy to do. And so, you know, 99% of the time, they're very positive, upbeat type conversations whenever you have those interactions.
For sure. And we have, Steve, I'm going to finish off the questions here with one from you that we had submitted to the Google form. How do we prevent the over commercialization of natural resources? I know this is something I struggle with, of where do we talk about the business of hunting? I know it's part of, it's something that I've always struggled with internally. And so how do we prevent, I say this as a business professor, the over commercialization of things?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, you know, people should go away and ponder that some more. But I would say, first off, we really need to maintain a healthy base of public land. I think that really provides opportunity and access for everybody out there. And so that's really key to making hunting and hiking and anything you want to do outdoors available to everybody. When you get into private land, it gets a little more complicated. You know, people are making decisions about how they can make a living on their land. And, you know, a lot of that boils down to financial decisions. So, you know, we do a lot of work with government programs that incentivize conservation, but, you know, when something like corn gets to be very valuable, they'll take that land out of conservation and plant it in corn. So we have to be mindful of that. So I don't know that the private land question is one I continue to wrestle with, because in some ways, if there's a financial incentive for the landowner, they're more apt to protect and preserve habitat on their ground, as opposed to it being you know, less of a financial decision. So I think that's something that probably we all need to think about and continue to work on, because there's a lot of our wildlife and fisheries populations that depend on that private land. And so it's got to work for the landowners as well. But that public land base, I think, is key to all of us, and we need to, protect and appreciate and take good care of that too.
I think that's a great way to end. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that tuned in tonight. And thank you to McKenzie, Kurt, and Steve for sharing your experiences. I know the three of you have a vast amount of experience, and this was just a drop in the bucket. And I know I appreciate your time, and thank you for being on here tonight. So, and thank you for all the participants for tuning in. So have a good night.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Brady. Appreciate it.